Free your mind.
How many of you have ever seen the movie The Matrix? Two pills. One blue, one red. And he has to make a choice. If he chooses the blue pill, he'll fall asleep. If he chooses the red pill, he'll finally learn the truth. And I'm here to give you that red pill. I'm here to give you that red pill.
Everything we think we know about the meat industry is a lie.
If you're told the lie enough times, it becomes part of your reality. And if enough people are taught that lie, well, now it becomes part of the culture. This is the Matrix. The lie we tell ourselves about where our food is coming from. Where our food is coming from.
The reality is far more disturbing.
We torture and kill 2 billion sentient, loving animals every week. 2 billion.
And most of us don't even blink an eye. How is it possible that we can kill 300 animals every second and not question that? Because of the story we've been told. The Matrix is a story. When told enough times to enough people, it becomes part of that culture. It becomes the tradition. Just because we have a tradition doesn't mean it's morally acceptable. Slavery. Less than 200 years ago. And that was a tradition. Tradition and morality are not always the same. And as we evolve as a culture, so do our traditions. We've been taught to perceive this animal to be different from this animal. And veganism is simply changing your perception. That's it. That's all it is. You just change your perception. It's not necessary to kill an animal. You don't have to kill animals. If you believe the image on the carton is where you're getting your milk from, you're deceiving yourself. This is a fantasy. It only exists in your head. It's a blue pill fed to you by the industry
To get you to buy their products.
This is the Matrix, the lie we tell ourselves about where our food is coming from.
A choice between knowledge or ignorance, slavery or freedom.
The truth will set us free.
If we choose to accept it and act upon it, knowledge applied is power in the one.
Break free from the Matrix. It's time to evolve.
This is Neo Human Eve.
Fluffy McFlufferson, Pussy Muselot, Turtle Turtleson, and Muffinhead. In 2014, Americans spent over $56 billion on their beloved pets. But how can we reconcile this affinity with the horrific ways in which animals are often treated? Thinkers like René Descartes have argued that since animals lack consciousness, they are essentially machines and thus do not have moral status. A less extreme view is that animals are conscious, but their core sentience is so fleeting that things don't matter to them like they do to us. But to Australian philosopher Peter Singer, drawing moral boundaries based on species characteristics is utterly arbitrary. In his book Animal Liberation, Singer argues that we suffer from a form of speciesism. In other words, since there is a belief that animals don't share the level of consciousness that humans exhibit, they don't deserve to be given similar moral consideration. Granted, it's reasonable to suggest that animals and humans should not share the same rights. The right to vote, for instance, would be wasted on a Pikachu. But is it not also wasted on people who are incapable of making rational choices? Yet, we don't consider those individuals as altogether different from the rest of us. Clearly, we are inconsistent with our application of speciesism. To Singer, the principle of equality shouldn't be based solely on consciousness or intelligence. What's most important is the capacity for a being to experience pain and suffering. Recognizing animals' capacity to suffer is as much a moral characteristic as recognizing our own. According to at least one philosophical theory, moral actions are those that increase pleasures and decrease pains. Initially known as hedonism and later popularized by Jeremy Bentham as utilitarianism, this philosophy holds that the only intrinsically good thing is pleasure, and the only intrinsically bad thing is pain. Hence, inflicting pain, whether it be against humans or animals, is wrong. For Singer, the capacity to suffer is the characteristic that qualifies any living thing to moral consideration, because pain is something that both animals and humans alike try to avoid. Think about it like this. A stone has no interest in avoiding being kicked, but a dog does, and therefore deserves moral treatment. So, dearest viewer, ask yourself, would you still eat bacon if it came from Pikachus?
And through evolution, we're all related. All species are related biologically. And through evolution, the question is not, can they reason or can they talk, but can they suffer? The question is not, can they reason or can they talk, but can they suffer? The ability to experience pain emerged early in the evolution of animals. We know they feel pain in the same way, and to the same degree. What we're doing to them is a moral atrocity. The important thing about the other species of animals is that they can suffer pain. So it doesn't matter what species you're from, any more than it matters what race or gender you're from, the pain is the same. The pain is the same. The pain is the same.
Strength must build up, not destroy. It should outdo itself, not others who are weaker. Used without responsibility, it causes nothing but harm and death. I can lift the heaviest weights, but I cannot take the responsibility off my shoulders. Because the way we use our strength defines our fate. What traces will I leave on my path into the future? Do we really have to kill in order to live? My true strength lies in not seeing weakness as weakness. My strength needs no victims. My strength is my compassion.
Vegetarianism has been around since the days of ancient Greece, and whilst it's still a minority view, at least in my home country, we all recognise it as a fairly normal, common, everyday kind of thing. There is actually some debate about whether or not vegetarianism is on the rise, and part of that is to do with a lot of people saying that they're vegetarian when actually they're not really. So for the purposes of this video at least, we'll define vegetarianism as not eating any animals at all. So let me make this clear. If you eat fish, you are not a vegetarian. So are there any philosophical reasons to become vegetarian? People often say that vegetarianism is healthier for you or better for the environment than eating meat, but those are practical arguments. Can we frame any arguments in moral philosophical terms? Some philosophers have pointed out that producing meat is actually quite a wasteful way of getting food. If we all became vegetarians, then we'd need less land to grow that food. And since there are so many starving people in the world, you might say that there's a moral reason to become vegetarian so we can use that land to grow more food and feed more people. That's a little too human focused though, right? That's saying that eating meat is bad because of the impact it has on other people. Is there any way we can frame arguments around the animals themselves? Well, the most obvious argument is that eating meat necessarily involves killing animals. It's generally assumed that animals are sentient, they are aware in some sense. Certain animals like us and chimps are maybe more aware, but it still feels like something to be a chicken. And animals have interests, by which we mean states of the world which would be good for them. So animals have an interest in staying alive. Most humans have an interest in eating meat because it's really tasty, but you might say that our interest in that pleasure, which is very small and which we could kind of do without, can't override the much more fundamental interests of an animal in staying alive. Some people would say it's just philosophically arrogant of us to assume that we have the right to override the most basic interests of another creature if we can help it. Obviously, by just being alive every day, we override the basic interests of millions of bacteria, and we override the basic interests of thousands of mosquitoes and locusts who are just trying to make a living, but in those cases, we have to because they're pests or because they cause diseases. Whereas in the case of eating meat, we could really do without that. Now you might just say that no, human interests do trump animal interests every time. I mean, chickens aren't that intelligent. It feels like something to be a chicken, but it doesn't feel like much. We aren't really depriving it of anything all that big. But there's another argument that has its locus classicus with the 18th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham, and the quote, "The question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer?" A lot of animals, or at least the ones that we eat, do feel pain. They can suffer, and when they're reared for slaughter, particularly if they're reared in intensive conditions, they do suffer. Quite a lot. You might say that free-range animals who live in better conditions don't suffer as much, but surely death counts as a harm. Do humans really have the right to inflict that harm? If you raised a human being in really nice conditions for a number of years and then killed it, would that be okay? Now, obviously people are going to say that those two cases are not the same, that there's some morally relevant differences, in which case, what are they? You might say that just buying and eating the meat doesn't directly contribute to the suffering, but you're supporting the industry with your money, you're kind of culpable a little bit. This does leave some meat-eating options open. For instance, if you accidentally hit a wild animal with your car, then you didn't deliberately cause it suffering, but it still kinda happened. Are you okay to eat it? Personally, I'd be inclined to say yes. I mean, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, put it in your mouth. Or if meat cells could be grown in a petri dish without ever having been part of any animal, then presumably that would be okay. Of course, that's all well and good, but a lot of people eat meat, and in my case, I know it would be really, really difficult to give it up because it's just so tasty. Is it fair to set moral standards that most people would find it difficult to meet? Well, morality can be demanding. Just because you really, really don't want to do something doesn't mean you don't have a moral obligation to do it. And remember, demandingness is relative. If you grew up vegetarian in a society that was predominantly vegetarian, you'd probably find it pretty easy to do without meat.
Cornell and Harvard say the optimal amount of meat in a healthy human diet is precisely 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Cornell and Harvard say the optimal amount of meat in a healthy human diet is precisely 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Meat kills animals. Meat kills economies. Killing our economies. Water, as you know, is the new oil. Nations will soon be going to war for it. It takes 50,000 liters of precious drinking water to make 1 kilo of beef. Today, 1 billion people are hungry. 20 million people will die from malnutrition. Cutting meat by only 10% will feed 100 million people. And eliminating meat will end starvation forever. Go vegan. Eliminating meat will end starvation forever. Go vegan.
You know, the world's climate scientists tell us that the highest safe level of emissions would be around 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We're already at 400. They tell us that the sort of safest we could hope to do without having perilous implications as far as drought, famine, human conflict, major species extinction would be about a 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. We're rapidly approaching that, and with all the built-in carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere, we're easily going to exceed that. So on our watch, we are facing the next major extinction of species on the Earth that we haven't seen since the time of the dinosaurs disappearing. You know, when whole countries go underwater because of sea level rise, when whole countries find that there's so much drought that they can't feed their population, and as a result they need to desperately migrate to another country or invade another country. I mean, we're going to have climate wars in the future.
The Post sent me to a report online published by the United Nations stating that cows produce more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. This means that raising cattle produces more greenhouse gases than all cars, trucks, trains, boats, planes combined, 13% compared to 18% for livestock. This is because cows produce a substantial amount of methane from their digestive process. Methane gas from livestock is 25 to 100 times more destructive than carbon dioxide from vehicles. Hydraulic fracturing for natural gas uses an incredible amount of water. A staggering 100 billion gallons of water is used every year in the United States. But when I compared this with animal agriculture, raising livestock just in the US consumes 34 trillion gallons of water. And it turns out the methane emissions from both industries are nearly equal. I found out that 1/4 pound hamburger requires over 660 gallons of water to produce. Here I've been taking these short showers trying to save water, and to find out just eating one hamburger is the equivalent of showering 2 entire months. So much attention is given to lowering our home water use, yet domestic water use is only 5% of what is consumed in the US versus 55% for animal agriculture. That's because it takes upwards of 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef.
There's one study that found that 1 pound of beef, 2,500 gallons of water.
Yeah.
Eggs is 477 gallons of water, and cheese almost 900 gallons. I mean, I guess it's one simple, why isn't it on Save Our Water? Just, it's kind of like if you went to someone's house and my neighbor has a faucet, you know, dripping, and then you see this giant hose turn full blast until 660 gallons of water are shooting out into the street, flooding the entire street. I think I would say, hey, you know, turn that off, please. It seems like it's a huge thing that we could be doing by far more than anything else.
I started doing more investigating on the impacts of livestock and found out this situation was actually worse than I had thought. In 2009, 2 advisors from the World Bank released an analysis on human-induced greenhouse gases, finding that animal agriculture was responsible not for 18%, as the UN stated, but was actually 51% of all greenhouse gases. 51%. Yet all we hear about is burning fossil fuels. This devastating figure is due to clear-cutting rainforests for grazing, respiration, and all the waste animals produce. This makes animal agriculture the #1 contributor to human-caused climate change. But not only that, I found out raising animals for food consumes 1/3 of all the planet's fresh water, occupies up to 45% of the Earth's land, is responsible for up to 91% of Amazon destruction, is a leading cause of species extinction, ocean dead zones, and habitat destruction. Yet, the world's largest environmental groups that are supposed to be saving our world didn't mention this anywhere.
So my calculations are that without using any gas or oil or fuel ever again from this day forward, that we would still exceed our maximum carbon equivalent greenhouse gas emissions, the 565 gigatons, by the year 2030, without the electricity sector even, or energy sector even factored in the equation, all simply by raising and eating livestock.
If you reduce the amount of methane emissions, the level in the atmosphere goes down fairly quickly, and within decades, as opposed to CO2. If you reduce the emissions to the atmosphere, you don't really see a signal in the atmosphere for 100 years or so.
The single largest contributor to every known environmental ill known to humankind: deforestation, land use, water scarcity, the destabilization of communities, world hunger. The list doesn't stop. It's an environmental disaster that's being ignored by the very people who should be championing.
Free-living animals made up, 10,000 years ago, made up 99% of the biomass. And human beings, we only made up 1% of the biomass. Today, only 10,000 years later, which is really just a fraction of time, we human beings and the animals that we own as property make up 98% of the biomass. And wild, free-living animals make up only 2%. We've basically completely stolen the world, the earth, from free-living animals to use for ourselves and our cows and pigs and chickens and factory farmed fish. And the oceans have been even more devastated.
Greenpeace's response reminded me of the statistic that 116,000 pounds of farm animal excrement is produced every second in the United States alone. That is enough waste per year to cover every square foot of San Francisco, New York City, Tokyo, Paris, New Delhi, Berlin, Hong Kong, London, Rio de Janeiro, Delaware, Bali, Costa Rica, and Denmark combined. UN reported that 3/4 of the world's fisheries are overexploited, fully exploited, or significantly depleted due to overfishing.
The oceans are under siege like never before, and marine environments are in trouble. And if we don't wake up and do something about it, we're going to see fishless oceans by the year 2048. That's the prediction from scientists.
The way fishing is done today to feed the demand for 90 million tons of fish is primarily through massive fish nets. For every single pound of fish caught, there's up to 5 pounds of untargeted species trapped, such as dolphins, whales, sea turtles, and sharks, known as bykill. If we were to imagine this same sort of practice happening on the African savanna, targeting gazelle, but in the process scooping up every single lion, giraffe, ostrich, and elephant, nobody would stand for it. Yet, this is what is happening in our oceans every single day.
Our founder, Captain Watson, likes to say, if the oceans die, we die. That's not a tagline, that's the truth.
Perhaps the only other ecosystem that is being destroyed at such a rapid rate are the world's rainforests. Our global rainforests are essentially the planet's lungs. They breathe in CO2 and exhale oxygen. An acre of rainforest is cleared every second, and the leading cause is to graze animals and grow their feed crops. That is essentially an entire football field cleared every single second. And it is estimated that every day, close to 100 plant, animal, and insect species are lost due to rainforest destruction. Palm oil plantations are causing tremendous deforestation in the Indonesian rainforest. It is estimated that palm oil is responsible for 26 million acres being cleared, though compared to livestock and their feed crops, they were responsible for 136 million acres of rainforest lost to date. The Kierkegaard model of raising animals, which requires 4,500 acres producing 80,000 pounds of meat. The average American eats 209 pounds of meat per year. If that was all grass-fed beef, only 382 people could be fed on their land. That equates to 11.7 acres per person times 314 million Americans, which equals 3.7 billion acres of grazing land. Unfortunately, there are only 1.9 billion acres in the U.S.'s lower 48 states. Currently, nearly half of all United States land is already dedicated to animal agriculture. If we were to switch over to grass-fed beef, it would require clearing every square inch of the United States, up into Canada, all of Central America, and well into South America. And this is just to feed the United States' demand on meat. But that figure doesn't even take into consideration that much of that land isn't suited to graze livestock. We would have to convert all mountain ranges to grassland, clear ancient forests and national parks to grazing, and demolish every city just to make room to graze cows. Just like Brazil, the United States isn't suited to meet the demands for meat. Turns out, due to land use, grass-fed beef is more unsustainable than even factory farming. I had to come to terms with the fact there was no way to sustainably raise enough animals to feed the world's current demand on meat, and had my doubts on dairy as well. But I did want to talk with a premier organic dairy company to see if they believe their product was sustainable for the world's population.
But the demand on dairy-based protein in the world is only going to increase, and there's not enough land on the planet to do this type of dairying around the world. It's just the environment is not going to be that way. The land's not there.
So I guess on a global scale, a conclusion would be dairy is not sustainable.
Unless we start digging up houses and putting pastures back.
How could cow's milk be sustainable? For when 1 gallon of milk, it takes upwards of 1,000 gallons of water to produce.
When you really look at who's benefiting and who's lobbied for this system of agriculture, it's the largest food producers in the country and the largest meat producers. And once they become so large and wealthy, then they can dictate the federal policies around producing food because they have so much political power.
The animal agriculture industry is one of the most powerful industries on the planet. I think most people in this country are aware of the influence of money and industry on politics, and we really see that clearly on display with this industry in particular. Most people would be shocked to learn that animal rights and environmental activists are the #1 domestic terrorism threat, according to the FBI.
Some people would say the problem isn't really animal agriculture, but actually human overpopulation. In 1812, there were 1 billion people on the planet. In 1912, there were 1.5 billion. Then, just 100 years later, our population exploded to 7 billion humans. This number is rightly given a great deal of attention, but an even more important figure when determining world population is the world's 70 billion farm animals humans raise. The human population drinks 5.2 billion gallons of water every day and eats 21 billion pounds of food. But just the world's 1.5 billion cows alone drink 45 billion gallons of water every day and eat 135 billion pounds of food. This isn't so much a human population issue, it's a human eating animals population issue. Environmental organizations not addressing this is like health organizations trying to stop lung cancer without addressing cigarette smoking. But instead of secondhand smoking, it's secondhand eating, which affects the entire planet.
We're growing enough food right now in the world to feed between 12 and 15 billion people. We only have 7 billion people. We have roughly 1 billion people starving every single day. Worldwide, 50% of the grain and legumes that we're growing, we're feeding to animals. So they're eating huge amounts of grain and legumes. And in the United States, it's more like closer to 70, 80, depending on which grain it is, about 90% of the soybean.
82% of the world's starving children live in countries where food is fed to animals in the livestock systems that are then killed and eaten by more well-off individuals in developed countries.
Is it even possible to be a healthy vegetarian or vegan?
Is it possible to be a healthy vegetarian or vegan? I became vegan for, 32 years ago now, and I run several miles every day. I go biking 40, 50 miles through the countryside. I work long hours. I feel great. It's nice waking up in a light, trim body every day. And so many of my vegan friends and patients, are just, they're thriving since their transition to a vegan diet. So yes, and I've seen vegan moms go through healthy vegan pregnancies and deliver healthy vegan children and raise them to tall, full-size, intelligent vegan adults. And yes, certainly all the nutrients are there in the plant kingdom to do this. That is correct.
Think anyone should be consuming dairy?
I really don't. When you think about it, the purpose of cow's milk, I did most of my growing up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. The purpose of cow's milk is to turn a 65-pound calf into a 400-pound cow as rapidly as possible. Cow's milk is baby calf growth fluid. That's what this stuff is. Everything in that white liquid, the hormones, the lipids, the proteins, the sodium, the growth factors, the IGF, every one of those is meant to blow that calf up to a great big cow, or it wouldn't be there. And whether you pour it on your cereal as a liquid, whether you clot it into yogurt, whether you eat it into cheese, whether you freeze it into ice cream, it's baby calf growth fluid. And women eat it, and it stimulates their tissues, and it gives women breast lumps. It makes the uterus get big, and they get fibroids, and they bleed, and they get hysterectomies, and they need mammograms, and gives guys man boobs. This is, cow's milk is the lactation secretions of a large bovine mammal who just had a baby. It's for baby calves. I tell my patients, go look in the mirror. Now, do you have big ears? Do you have a tail? Are you a baby calf? If you're not, don't be eating baby calf growth fluid in any level. There's nothing in it people need.
To feed a person on an all plant-based vegan diet for a year requires just 1/6 of an acre of land. To feed that same person on a vegetarian diet that includes eggs and dairy requires 3 times as much land. To feed an average U.S. citizen's high-consumption diet of meat, dairy, and eggs requires 18 times as much land. This is because you can produce 37,000 pounds of vegetables on 1.5 acres, but only 375 pounds of meat on that same plot of land. I also learned the comparison doesn't end with land use. A vegan diet produces half as much CO2 as an American omnivore, uses 1/11th the amount of fossil fuels, 1/13th the amount of water, and 1/18th of the amount of land. After adding this all up, I realized I had the choice every single day to save over 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square feet of forested land, the equivalent of 20 pounds of CO2, and one animal's life every single day.
Speciesism, sexism, racism, prejudice in favor of one's own kind against others. Speciesism, sexism, racism, prejudice in favor of one's own kind against others.
Have you ever wondered why you might eat chicken's wings, but not swan's wings? Beef burgers, but not mouse burgers? Have you ever wondered why you might drink cow's milk, but not pig's milk? And have you ever wondered why you haven't wondered? I never wondered about these things until I had a shocking experience that changed my life forever. Let me explain. In an attempt to understand what had happened to me, I spent years conducting research, which led to a fascinating discovery. What I discovered transformed my worldview, my health, and my happiness, so that today, at 49, I feel better than I did when I was half my age. To help you understand what happened to me, I'd like you to imagine you are a guest at a dinner party, enjoying a delicious beef stew, and your food is so delicious that you ask your host for the recipe. The secret, she replies, is in the meat. You need to use 3 pounds of well-seasoned golden retriever. Now take a moment to reflect on your thoughts and feelings. Chances are, even though the meat itself didn't change at all, your experience of it changed dramatically. So what happened to cause you to have such a strong reaction? That's the question I began asking 25 years ago, after I had a similar experience. Well, sort of. Like many people, I grew up with a dog who I loved, and I also grew up eating meat. And I never thought about how strange it was that while I would never want to eat my dog, I regularly ate the flesh and eggs and dairy of animals who were not terribly different than my dog. They, too, had feelings and lives that mattered to them. I just never thought about why I ate some animals but not others. I never thought about the inconsistencies in my attitudes and behaviors toward animals because when I was eating meat, eggs, and dairy, I didn't actually think I was eating animals. Of course, I knew on some level that these products came from individuals who had once been alive. I had that knowing without knowing. But on another level, I just didn't make the connection. It wasn't until I wound up hospitalized after eating bacteria-infested beef that I had a major paradigm shift. After I got sick, just the thought of eating beef disgusted me. In fact, all meat seemed disgusting. And suddenly, I saw meat not as food, but as dead animals. Beef stew seemed no different than golden retriever stew. And as I looked at the world with new eyes, I saw animals' body parts everywhere I turned, lining grocery store shelves, filling trucks bound for the market, spilling off lunch trays, packed in delicatessen freezers. And people everywhere, rational, caring people like myself, were putting these animals' bodies into their mouths as though nothing at all were wrong. I had to understand how I could have gone through my entire life being blind to what was right in front of me, and why nobody I talked to about this was willing to hear what I had to say. It wasn't until 2 decades later, after I had completed my doctoral research on the psychology of eating meat, that I had the answer. And this is what I discovered. It turns out that most of us eat animals not because we need to, or even because we truly wish to, but because we have been conditioned to by a widespread destructive belief system that operates outside our awareness and therefore without our conscious consent. We often assume that only vegans and vegetarians bring their beliefs to the dinner table. But the only reason many of us eat cows but not dogs, for example, is because we do have a belief system when it comes to eating animals. When eating animals is not a necessity, which is the case for many people in the world today, then it is a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs. So what my research uncovered is that there is an invisible belief system that conditions us to eat certain animals. And I named that system carnism. Carnism is universal. In meat-eating cultures around the world, people typically classify only a tiny handful of animals out of millions of possible species as edible. All the rest are classified as inedible and disgusting. So even though the type of species consumed changes from culture to culture, members of all cultures tend to find their own choices to be rational, and the choices of other cultures to be disgusting and often even offensive. Carnism is like a vast fog that surrounds, saturates, and shrouds our world. And carnism is a violent system. Meat cannot be procured without violence, and egg and dairy production cause extensive harm to animals. In fact, today, the egg and dairy industries are arguably the most brutal of all carnistic industries. And violent systems such as carnism keep themselves alive by using defense mechanisms, so that rational, humane people participate in irrational, inhumane practices without fully realizing what they are doing. These defenses hide the truth about animal agriculture and distort what little we are able to see, so that we support a system we would likely otherwise find deeply offensive. The primary defense of carnism is denial. Carnism denies the truth by making it invisible. One way carnism remains invisible is by remaining unnamed, so eating animals appears to be a given, rather than a choice. Another way carnism remains invisible is by keeping its victims out of sight, and therefore conveniently out of public consciousness. But although we don't see the inner worlds of farmed animals, these individuals are in fact sentient, conscious beings. For example, pigs are at least as intelligent as 3-year-old humans. Cows develop deep and lasting bonds with their family and friends. For instance, they may cry and keen for weeks when their babies are forcibly taken from them. Chickens are able to distinguish between 100 different faces of members of their species, and they have 30 different calls to signal types of threats. And scientists have demonstrated that certain fish and crustaceans have intelligence and pain receptors, such that in some places in the world it is now illegal to keep fish in small bowls or to boil lobsters alive. And although we don't see the factories in which animals are turned into food, these so-called farms produce approximately 98% of the meat, eggs, and dairy we eat. In fact, 124,000 farmed animals are slaughtered globally not every day or even every hour, but every single minute. But think about it. How many of these animals have you seen? Ultimately, hiding the truth about meat, egg, and dairy production from us is what carnism most depends on. So becoming aware of this truth is essential to freeing ourselves from the system. So I'm going to show a 2-minute video of animal factories. Now, I know this kind of imagery can be difficult to see, but I encourage you to watch because I believe the empowerment that awareness ultimately brings will be well worth your brief discomfort. And this is feedback I've gotten from thousands of people who have been willing to see through the fog of carnism.
Do you ever get mad when you take the kids?
Cows come crazy when I take the babies. Then they'll burn them.
She threw up?
They just go for veal. And she broke her foot. It takes too long to heal.
Deadly manure.
Wham on her side. And then
USDA endeavors.
I know it's not easy to see that. Fortunately for us, the hard part's over. In fact, thanks to so many people like you who have been willing to see the painful truths about carnism, the meat, egg, and dairy industries have begun to be weakened. So animal agribusinesses have scrambled to restore their profit margins by assuring us that we can eat animals who are happy to be our food, that we can eat so-called humane or bio meat, eggs, and dairy. However, most humanely raised animals live in misery, much as their inhumanely raised counterparts do. And all farmed animals ultimately end up in the very same place. And humane meat is a concept so absurd as to be an insult to any consumer who pauses to reflect on his or her choices. For instance, most of us would consider it cruel to kill a happy, healthy golden retriever simply because people like the way her legs taste. Yet when the very same thing is done to other animals, we are expected to believe that it's humane. And carnism hides the truth about not only the non-human victims of carnism, but also about the human victims of carnism, us. An animal-based diet, which is what carnism conditions us to follow, has been linked with some of the most prevalent and deadly diseases in the world today. While a plant-based or vegan diet, which is what carnism conditions us to resist, has been shown to prevent and reverse disease, as well as to optimize health and enhance athletic performance. And carnism conditions us to block our awareness and our empathy, qualities that are vital to our own well-being and to the well-being of our world. Another defense is justification. Carnism teaches us to justify eating animals by teaching us to believe that the myths of meat, eggs, and dairy are the facts of meat, eggs, and dairy. In other words, carnism teaches us to believe in the 3 N's of justification. Eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. And of course, we've heard this all before. Slavery is normal, natural, and necessary. And the myths of carnism are institutionalized. They are supported and promoted by all major social institutions, which in turn transmit them to us. So carnistic bias is embedded within the very foundations of society. And when we are born into an institutionalized system such as carnism, we internalize it. We take into ourselves both the myths and the products of carnism. Inside us, carnism creates a fog in our minds, distorting our perceptions of meat, eggs, dairy, and the animals we eat. For example, carnism teaches us to place animals in rigid categories in our minds, and therefore in our hearts. And carnism teaches us to see farmed animals as objects, as things rather than beings. And carnism teaches us to see farmed animals as abstractions, as lacking any individuality or personality of their own. A pig is a pig, and all pigs are the same. But the fact that carnism needs to use such elaborate defense mechanisms is actually good news. It shows the true vulnerability of the system. Think about it. We care about animals, we care about justice, and we care about the truth. And carnism depends on our not caring, and the system is built on deception. So carnism needs us to do its job for it, to ignore the truth, and to resist the very thing that would set us free: awareness. Awareness is the light that shines through the fog of carnism, illuminating the dark truths the system works so hard to hide from us. Awareness cuts through the cloudy haze in our minds, dispelling the shadow that's been cast on our hearts and releasing the natural glow of our empathy. Awareness is the greatest threat to carnism, because with awareness, we can make choices that reflect what we authentically think and feel, rather than what we have been taught to think and feel. We can make our choices freely. Without awareness, there is no free choice. And while it's easy to feel that the problem is so big that our individual efforts won't make a difference, or that the system will never change, the truth is that every choice we make does make a difference, to others and to ourselves. And history shows us, again and again, that awareness opens the door to social transformation. When people of integrity clear their vision, they demand change. And powerful change is happening right now, around the world, as more and more people are opening their minds and saying no to carnism. The vegan movement, which is the counterpoint to carnism, is one of the fastest growing social justice movements in the world today. Carnism, of course, is fighting back, using misinformation, disinformation, and scare tactics in an attempt to invalidate the vegan message. But despite what carnism wants us to believe, veganism is healing for all of us. The goal of the vegan movement is to create a world based on compassion rather than cruelty, empathy rather than apathy, authenticity rather than dishonesty, justice rather than oppression. So with awareness, we can create a better world for all beings, human and non-human alike. With awareness, we can move beyond carnism. We can reduce and ideally one day eliminate our consumption of meat, eggs, and dairy. We can learn more about carnism and veganism to become more informed consumers and empowered citizens. And one simple thing you can do right now is to share this video with everyone you know. Regardless of what you ate for dinner last night, you become a part of the solution simply by clicking on share. Thank you for helping make carnism visible, and for helping make carnism history.
While intelligence speaks, wisdom listens, and we willingly covered our ears to Mother Nature's screams and closed our eyes to all of her help-wanted signs. Wisdom knows that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so if we were wise, we would not be shocked when we see storms that are stronger than ever before, or more drought, hurricanes, and wildfire than ever before, because there's more pollution than ever before, more carbon, more trees cut down than ever before. At a record pace, we have increased the extinction of animals by 1,000 times the normal rate. What a feat. In the next 10 to 100 years, every beloved animal character in every children's book is predicted to go extinct. Lions gone, rhinos gone, tiger, gorilla, elephant, polar bear gone. Species that have been here longer than us will be gone because of us. We turn the circle of life into our own personal conveyor belt. Somebody, anybody help. We were given so much, the only planet in this solar system with life. I mean, we are family, literally. Everything, every species is connected genetically, from the sunflower to the sunfish. And this is what we must recognize before it's too late, because the real crisis is not global warming, environmental destruction, or animal agriculture. It is us. These problems are symptoms of us, byproducts of us.
Remember Cecil the lion? A lot of people were shocked, even outraged, when they heard about his death at the hands of an American hunter in 2015. The response to the lion's death was so strong that the guy who shot Cecil basically went into hiding until he issued an apology. But isn't that a little bit strange? We react with horror when we hear about a majestic lion being shot, or sacks of kittens being tossed into rivers, or owners training their dogs to fight each other for sport. But what is the difference between killing Cecil and killing a deer, or a duck, or a cow, or a chicken? How do we reconcile the strong feelings many of us have about certain animals, mainly the cute ones like kittens and puppies, with the way we actually use animals in our own lives? Most of us think nothing of using non-human animals for their meat, milk, or skins, and not only do we use animals in these ways, but using them as we do almost always harms them. A common method for testing cosmetics, for example, involves restraining rabbits and putting the product into their eyes, leaving it for a set amount of time, and then washing it out and checking for ill effects. Rabbits are used for this because they don't have tear ducts, so they aren't able to flush the product out of their eyes the way our eyes would. It may not surprise you to hear that this can be extremely painful and often blinds the rabbits, which are then euthanized. On factory farms, chickens are housed in tiny cages, with each bird occupying a space the size of a piece of standard printer paper. Their beaks are often cut down to keep them from pecking each other, and when they're no longer laying enough eggs, they're killed. These are just a couple examples of the conditions animals experience at our expense, and they're not unusual. We'd never dream of using another human being being in these ways, but we think nothing of doing it to non-human animals. So how do we let ourselves do that? Contemporary Australian philosopher Peter Singer uses the word speciesism to describe giving preference to our own species over another in the absence of morally relevant differences. Singer reminds us that there was a time when most Americans thought it was totally normal and right for members of one group to literally own members of another group based on a morally irrelevant difference, skin color. And today, the members of the oppressing group look back on the reasoning of their ancestors with horror and shame. Well, Singer predicts that there will be a time when our descendants look back on us and our treatment of non-human animals with the same reaction. In a nutshell, Singer says, if it's not okay to do it to a human, it's not okay to do it to an animal either. Now, you might think you agree with him, because who doesn't love bunnies and kittens? But do you really agree with him? If you agree that we should treat like cases alike, and that a difference in treatment requires a morally relevant difference, then you have to identify the differences that justify treating non-human animals in ways that we would never subject humans to. One arbiter you might use to justify the difference is intelligence. There's no question that as a species, our intelligence trumps that of every other species on the planet. But we don't normally think that intelligence is a good way for deciding how you get treated. Dystopian novels like Brave New World bring out the visceral distaste we have for that kind of intelligence-based caste system. So if it's clearly wrong to treat members of our species differently based on intelligence, why would it be okay to treat members of other species differently on that same basis? Well, one response might be to argue that the difference in intelligence between the smartest and the least smart humans is much smaller than the intelligence gap between humans and other species. But empirically, that's not true. Sure, most humans fall within the same general range of intelligence, but some humans are profoundly cognitively disabled, and some animals, particularly primates, are probably more intelligent than those severely impaired humans. So that argument doesn't hold up. But maybe you think we should treat other animals the way we do just because we can. Contemporary American philosopher Carl Cohen, for example, calls himself a proud speciesist. He argues that every species is struggling to claw its way to the top, and that's how it should be. Every species ought to be concerned about protecting itself, he says, and since humans are currently at the top, well, that means that we're the best. So we can pretty much do whatever we want to other beings. The problem with this reasoning is you'd almost certainly not be okay with it if you weren't a member of the privileged species. Remember, this is the exact argument that was given by slave owners to justify their domination of Africans and indigenous peoples. So if you don't normally think might makes right, then wouldn't it be hypocritical to use it as a justification in this case? Yet another rationale is that this is the way it's always been. And it's true, humans have been dominating non-human animals for a really long time. It's part of our culture, and entire ways of life are based on it. Farmers, ranchers, fishers, and so on. But arguments from tradition are always philosophically suspect. The mere fact that something has been a certain way for a long time says nothing about whether it's good. And once again, that was the same argument used in defense of slavery. And yes, the abolition of slavery was economically costly and a huge disruption of slave-owning culture, but I think that we all agree it was totally worth it. Still, one of the strongest arguments for our uses of non-human animals is the argument of need. Most people believe that we're justified in doing what it takes in order to survive. In fact, most people even think it's okay to kill another human in the name of self-defense. This argument doesn't justify using animals for non-necessary things like cosmetics testing, but eating is a necessity, so there's nothing wrong with eating animals, right? The problem is we know humans can be perfectly healthy without eating animals. So yes, you need to eat, but you don't need to eat animals. For his part, Singer says we should think about the treatment of non-human animals in terms of an equal consideration of interests. This means that identical interests should be given equal weight, regardless of what type of being they occur in. Of course, humans have all sorts of interests that animals don't have. Some of us have interests in going to college and voting and getting married, and non-human animals don't have an interest in doing those things, so we don't have any obligation to help them do that stuff. But there is an interest that we all share. We have an interest in avoiding pain. Singer's utilitarian ancestor, Jeremy Bentham, said, "The question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but rather, can they suffer?" Because we are all alike in our capacity to suffer and in our desire to avoid suffering. Utilitarians like Bentham and Singer say that we need to equally consider that interest and that we are unjustified in preferencing human interests over non-human ones. Now, to be clear, as utilitarians, these thinkers would never issue an out-and-out prohibition on the use of non-human animals. What they're against is the unthinking assumption that animals are at our disposal. Since they're in the group of things that feel like humans, they must be factored into the utilitarian calculus. So if the issue is really about need, if you're literally starving and the only thing around to eat is an animal, they'd argue that you're morally justified in eating it, because the suffering involved in your death by starvation would outweigh the suffering of the animal. The problem is that for most people in the industrialized world today, it's not about need, it's simply about taste and convenience and how things have always been done. But let's head over to the thought bubble to look at this from another angle in this week's Flash Philosophy. Here's Fluffy. She's been your close companion since she was a kitten. You love her very much and you've given her the best life you could. But now, Fluffy is nearing the end of her life. You'll care for her until the end, but when she dies, why not eat her? I mean, unless you're a vegetarian, there seems to be no good reason that you'd be repelled by this idea, but you almost certainly are. Take some time here to think about why that is. It can't be about harm, because Fluffy is already dead. She can't feel pain. Maybe you're appealing to some sort of principle of respect for the dead, but we know that some cultures think the best way to respect the dead is to consume their flesh. So if you're only not eating her because you have a thing against eating cats in particular, but you're okay with eating other animals, that seems pretty speciesist. It's just that the species that you're giving preference to are both humans and cats, but you're still a speciesist. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Okay, so Singer has given us some pretty strong reasons to reevaluate our treatment of non-human animals. But you still might be thinking, why should I care? What if I don't care that I'm a speciesist? I like eating meat and feel no shame about it because everyone I know eats meat too. Well, the thing is, philosophers want you to be consistent with your beliefs. They want you to think about why you think it would be wrong to eat Fluffy, or why you wouldn't eat dog meat if it was served to you, or why you were upset about Cecil the lion, and yet you have no problem eating, say, bacon, even though dogs and pigs have the same level of cognition and awareness. Philosophers want you to be able to justify your actions, to give reasons for what you do. So if you're saying that reasons don't matter, that you can just do what you want even if your actions are internally inconsistent, then not only are you not doing philosophy, well, you're sort of opting out of rational discourse altogether. Because if these reasons don't matter, then why should any reasons matter? If I want to be a racist or homophobe or a sexist, and I'm comfortable with it because the people I hang out with have those attitudes too, well, the conversation's sort of over. It can be really hard to scrutinize your own actions, not just regarding non-human animals, but in most areas of your life.
Make a connection. We're all Earthlings. And what do all Earthlings have in common? Two things. We all want to live. We all desire to live. And the second thing is we all avoid pain. Those two things make us equal. We all desire to live. And we all avoid pain. Pain is pain. Suffering is suffering. Don't categorize it. This is all suffering for these animals. Every glass of milk supports this industry. These are industries. These are atrocities. They're selling the product. It's addictive. It's addictive. It has a chemical called casomorphine. When you digest it, that chemical is released. Casomorphine. Morphine. It makes you giddy. It makes you want more. Get off the leaf, the dairy crap. Get off the leaf, the dairy crap. This is not food. It's a grab. It's a grab. Casomorphine. Morphine. It makes you giddy. It makes you want more. I'll show you hospitals full of people with heart disease, cancers, diabetes, osteoporosis, all stemming from animal protein. The main cause of every major disease on this planet. Any product that comes from an animal has animal protein. That makes sense. Animal products, animal protein. When you put that in your body becomes acidic. And your body's not meant to be acidic, it's meant to be alkaline. So how does your body compensate? Neutralize the acidity. Releasing calcium from the bones. So the more cow's milk you drink, according to these statistics, the weaker your bones become. The more animal protein you eat, the weak you both become. We have the potential to change the world. Your awareness is the first step of the solution. And acting from your awareness is the rest.
Vegans are creating a new age of enlightenment.
But let's talk about a different question first. Is it morally permissible to kill people for food? And again, I'm not talking about a situation like the Donner Party or situations where people crash land on a deserted island and if they don't eat each other, they're going to die. I mean, would it be permissible for you to keep some stranger in your house and kill that stranger for food rather than eat a kale sandwich? We don't have to talk about that question for very long. That has an easy answer. No, it is morally impermissible to kill people for food you don't need to eat. So let me ask you this. If it is permissible to kill pigs for food, but not permissible to kill people for food, there must be some difference between pigs and people that explains why it's permissible to kill the pig, but not the person. So what's the difference? Here's an idea. The pig is a pig. The person is a person. So this difference, I think, is supposed to be a difference in genetic makeup, the type of DNA the pig has. That's different from our genetic makeup. So is that the kind of difference that explains why it's morally permissible to kill the pig, but not morally permissible to kill us? Let me ask you this. There's a Twilight Zone episode called To Serve Man. If you want to see that episode, you should skip this part of the video because I'm going to give away something very important. In the Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man, aliens come to Earth. And to make a long story short, they're farming us for food. Is that morally permissible? And I think, no, it's not permissible for me to eat people for food I don't need. Neither is it permissible for aliens to eat us. But then imagine the alien says, but don't you see? You're a different sort of creature than we are. We have totally different genetic makeups. That does not seem like a very good answer the alien's given. One thing you might say is, yes, I see that we have different genetic makeups, but I'm still the kind of thing you shouldn't kill. But a pig might say that to us if we say, it's permissible for us to kill you because you're a pig and we are people. But maybe what you're getting at when you say a pig's a person, is people are special because, well, for one thing, we're quite a bit smarter than pigs, which isn't to say pigs are dummies. Pigs are pretty smart. People, just smarter. Okay. One thing you might ask is, why does that make it okay to kill the pig? But that's not what I want to ask. Because while I think you're smarter than a pig, you're watching a philosophy video. Not everyone is smarter than a pig. In fact, we all know some creatures, some people even probably, who are not smarter than pigs. Is it okay to eat those people? No, that's not a hard question. Now, one reason it might be you shouldn't eat people who have mental lives of pigs. We care about those people. It might be that my brother has the mental life of a pig, but it would be wrong to kill him for food because I care about him. But let me ask you two things about this. First, why does caring about my brother make a difference? If the reason it's wrong to kill my severely mentally handicapped brother for food is because I care about him, then what you're saying is the reason it's wrong doesn't have to do with my brother, so much it has to do with me. And that does not seem correct. It seems like there's something about what you're doing to my brother when you kill him for food that's objectionable, that has nothing to do with what you're doing to me. Well, let me ask you a different question. What if no one cared about my brother? What if my brother, with the mental life of a pig, were a hermit? No one cared about him. No one even knew about him. Would it be permissible to kill him for food then? I don't think so. I still think this is not a hard question. What we're looking for is a difference between people and pigs that explains why it's morally permissible to kill pigs for food, but not permissible to kill people. And we've tried some differences out. They're different species, but that doesn't really seem to explain it. people are smarter in general than pigs, that doesn't seem to explain it either. We care about people, don't care about pigs. That doesn't seem to explain it either. What else? Well, here's something people say sometimes when you talk about this. The pig would do it to us. Put a person with a pig. The pig might eventually eat the person. Does that show it's morally permissible for the person to eat the pig? Let me ask you a different question. Have you ever been punched by a very small child? I have. Do you think it was permissible for me to punch the child back, reasoning, he did it to me, therefore it's permissible for me to do it to him? I think that would not be very good reasoning. It would be wrong to punch the child, even though the child would do it to me. In fact, I think the child, if the child is young enough, doesn't do anything wrong if it does it to me. The child is not the kind of thing that does anything right or wrong. But still, we might do wrong to it. Last difference. We're the top of the food chain. Where we live in places where we can watch philosophy videos. Obviously, if we lived in the ocean, we wouldn't be the top of the food chain. But where we are, we're the top of the food chain. So isn't it morally permissible for us to take advantage of that and kill whatever we want for food? It might be that we're in a position to do various things to other animals because we're the top of the food chain. But that doesn't mean it's morally permissible for us to do it. I'm a very small person, so I'm constantly dealing with people who are much bigger than I am, who are much stronger than I am, who could pound me to a pulp very easily. Well, imagine they did. And I said, you shouldn't have done that. That was morally wrong. And they say, but don't you see? I'm stronger than you. That's terrible reasoning. Of course they're stronger than me. What we wanted to know is why it was okay for them to express their strength in that way. Similarly, it might be that we're above the pig on the food chain. And as we get ready to kill the pig to eat it, the pig might say, why are you eating me? And we just say, we can. We have control over you. That does not seem like a very good answer. Sometimes people say something related, which is, that's just the way nature is. That's why it's morally permissible. But it's natural to do all sorts of things that are morally wrong. If you're listening to this video and getting really frustrated, it's natural to want to punch me. It might be natural to punch me, but that doesn't mean you should do it. So, I'm perplexed. I started off asking whether it's okay to kill pigs for food. To answer that question, I asked first a very easy question, whether it's okay to kill people for food. That's an easy question. The answer is no. And then I asked, what's the difference between people and pigs, such that it's permissible to kill pigs for food, even though it's not permissible to kill people? And I've gone through a bunch of differences. None of them seem like they do the work that's required. None of them seem like they explain why it's okay to kill pigs for food, but it's not okay to kill people for food. So I hope you will help me figure out the answer, or decide it's morally wrong to kill pigs for food. Thanks.